Hello, my horror-loving dudes. I'm KillJoy Jake, and today we're doing a review of The Boogeyman 2023. And no, we're not talking about Boogeyman from 2005. That movie is a whole other animal. Let's just get into it.
Well, sometimes that is better.
Before I start reviewing The Boogeyman and all that, let's talk a little bit about it. The Boogeyman 2023 is a movie directed by Rob Savage and written by Scott Beck and Brian Woods, with revisions done by Mark Heyman. It's based on Stephen King's short story of the same title and comes from one of his most famous collection of short stories called Night Shift. The movie is produced by Sean Levy of Stranger Things and Dan Levine from Arrival. The Boogeyman had a $35 million budget, and after looking at the cast and seeing the movie, I'm genuinely confused where all of that money went. I would have never have guessed that from watching that movie it had this high of a budget. Probably for VFX. I don't know. I really don't know why it would be that high. Now, before we go any further in this video, I just want to warn y'all, there is going to be spoilers for the movie. I don't see a point in doing a non-spoiler review. There's really not too much to spoil in general. So if you want to see the movie, check it out and then come on back to this review. The Boogeyman falls under a category of movies that I like to call paranormal baloney. It's not bad, but it's certainly not your first option. The movie's pretty typical and predictable. It kind of falls into the same format of like your typical Conjuring movie. It's the same thing, but just Stephen King, I guess. I will say the concept for this movie sounds like it would be very lucrative. You're essentially throwing the A Quiet Place writers with a Stephen King story that should equal money. But to that point, they basically took Stephen King's short story, forced the characters into a Conjuring-like narrative, and made it their own thing with the same title. It's not bad, but I think it definitely could have been better at a conceptual level. Like if they would have stuck a little closer to the book and how it was like a little more Lovecraftian, it's more about Lester Billing telling his story to this therapist, and then there's this crazy twist ending, I would have been more into that movie, I think. So to just completely throw that concept out, instead of trying to stretch a short story across 90 minutes, they just made it its own thing. And even then, it's not really its own thing, it's just the Conjuring plotline, which I know I've said a lot, but it's like, really? Like, we've seen this movie so many times across like the last 13 years of horror. Like, I feel like the 2010s was dominated by this style of movies, so to just do the same old here and not really add anything new to the equation really just made me scratch my head and wonder why this movie was even made. It does have a lot of good things going for it though. David Dastmalchian is in this movie, and he's fantastic in literally everything he's in. He's probably the most well known as Polka Dot Man in James Gunn's movie with a title that I can't say on YouTube, which is completely ridiculous. But he's also in other huge movies like The Dark Knight and Prisoners, which are both pretty good. He's great in his very small role in this film, I thought, but like I just would have liked to see more of him. Chris Messina and Sophie Thatcher in the lead roles are serviceable, but once again, just nothing that stands out from your typical Conjuring movie. There were some really funny moments in the film and some effective jump scares that not all of them were ruined by the trailer, but for the most part, this movie was just overly complicated for no reason at the same time. We get to meet Lester Billings' wife, Rita Billings, during the runtime of this, and she really doesn't serve anything to the plot. The entire reason she's in the movie is just so that Sophie Thatcher's character can be like, oh, wait a minute, the thing bleeds, so that means we can kill it. I did appreciate that Predator reference though, I will say that. But like, that's all that subplot did. That is all that did for the storyline, and like, we could have done all of that in just one of the scare sequences we had at the Harper household. Like, imagine if when Sadie, Sophie Thatcher's character, is trapped in the closet because her friends are dicks, maybe Sadie found one of her mom's old like knives that she probably used for painting, think Bob Ross, and she got like a slice on the demon and some blood hit the ground. It's like, oh, blood came out of this thing? That means we can kill it because I've seen Predator before. Bam, there you go. I just saved you like 10 to 15 minutes of screen time where we could have done something else. I'm not saying I didn't like Rita's character or anything like that, but it didn't really serve the movie at all. Like, it was cool, like fighting off demons with shotgun shells that are rigged with wires and all that. Cool, okay, that's something different, but it didn't really add that much to the plot for like the tiniest little thing. Dr. Weller is another character who I feel like was just added for padding so that the runtime of this movie could have been longer. One of the craziest double beats I've ever seen in a movie is in this film, where we have the scare sequence that we've all seen from the trailer already a million times, where the girl has the light ball or whatever and she rolls it under her bed and she sees the demon for the first time. We get that sequence, but it's immediately followed with another scare sequence in the dark with this character. And once again, this is another side character in this movie who adds absolutely nothing to the plot. Like, sure, we have Chris Messina's dad character who doesn't want to open up about the death of the mom character that happened before the events of this movie. And you get to see at the very end of the movie that he finally unloads all of his trauma and talks it out with the therapist character. But like, the big thing we needed to do there was he needed to talk to his daughter about it. He needed to talk to her and the rest of his family and get that all out of the way so that they could move on. We didn't need this big showcase scene at the end of him going to therapy. I've seen this a million times at movies. If you wanted to do this in a more efficient way, you could have just had them eating dinner and laughing and goofing around and being like, hey, you know, mom would have liked that or something. You know, just a little something, a little aside to say that yes, they have talked about this and they've moved past it. At the very end of this movie, though, there is a nice callback to the book's original ending where you find out the therapist character has been the boogeyman the whole time. Sadie hears Dr. Weller's voice calling to her, and then she goes to look into the closet and something's in there and she just closes it. Ooh, spooky. You know, that was pretty cool. You honored the book in that way, I guess, so that's something. I just feel like the main storyline going on here was overly complicated, where the book story is very simple and only features a couple of characters. Basically, the whole Stephen King short story is just Lester Billings telling about what happened to his family to Dr. Harper here. The twist at the end of the book, too, is that Dr. Harper has been the boogeyman the whole time. I'm not out here saying it's Stephen King's best short story or anything like that, but it's simple and effective, and that's all that this movie needed to be, and it just got a little overcomplicated at times, in my opinion. Another thing to add, too, is that there's all these friend characters that Sadie has, and once again, they just don't serve that big of a purpose to the film. Really, the only purpose they serve in the film is so that they can lock Sadie in the closet, and then she sees the demon so that she believes her younger sister. But like, we could have gotten to that conclusion in a much more efficient way versus introducing 4 more characters. And my thing about that is, like, if you're gonna introduce 4 more characters, and one of them in particular, the blonde one, I can't remember her name, but she's like kind of nasty towards Sadie, and really the only thing that happens to her is that Sadie slaps her across the face. A death for that character would have been very satisfying, but like I said, she kind of just exits the movie right after that scene and we never see them again. The slap was pretty funny though, I will say that, and the whole theater was clapping at that moment, so that was pretty funny. I think if this movie was Annabelle 4, I would have been a little more easy on it, but because it's an original movie, because it's based on a Stephen King book, I'm definitely judging it based off of that. Like, look at what It did in 2017. Like, yes, in a lot of ways, that does follow a Conjuring-like format, but it does it in its own Stephen King-esque way. Instead of having a distressed family unit that is at the center of basically every single Conjuring film except for a select few, it's kids on bikes, which sure isn't super original. Every 80s movie did that. Stranger Things has done that, and also It most famously has done that. But it's much more about like the kids and their relationships versus like a family relationship. It's just a very different structure of a movie because of the characters you have within it. Your monster is also a shape-shifting alien from outer space versus a typical demon that we've seen in every Exorcist flick for the past like 40 years or so. That's another thing I want to talk about with the Boogeyman also. Like, the monster in this is almost exactly the same monster from A Quiet Place, which is also another movie written by Scott Beck and Brian Woods. I don't really have an issue with that. Like, the creature design was good, but it's almost the exact same thing as the Quiet Place aliens, so that's why it's just a little weird. This movie doesn't have a whole lot of Stephen King-isms in it either, which makes me a little sad. One of his biggest signatures is having an overly dark ending, and this one doesn't really have that. I mean, I guess you can argue the film is a little more ambiguous, but like, the original short story is ambiguous but leaning towards dark. This one is like, happy ending, the family's fine, and maybe the demon's still around, maybe. But like, if you're doing Stephen King, it can't be all sunshine and rainbows at the end of the movie. I mean, that's just not his formula. One of the things I love so much about The Mist is that they changed the book's ambiguous ending to a very dark and upsetting ending, one of the most tragic twist endings to a movie I've ever seen. It makes that film stand out big time to go even darker than what King usually does in his stories. This movie had an opportunity to do that again, because the short story's ending is super ambiguous, but they didn't take that route. Like, imagine if the end of this film was the family cowering in a corner saying like, we'll see mom soon, or something really upsetting like that, and they all die in a fire. Like, listen, that would be upsetting, don't get me wrong, but it would be way more powerful than what we got. The Boogeyman was in no way a bad movie. I think a lot of it is very well executed. There's some very scary sequences, some funny moments, some good character moments, but overall, it just feels like same old, same old. It never tried to do anything that was impressive or something different from some of its other competitors in the same subgenre. For that, I give The Boogeyman a 5 out of 10. It's solid. It's a solid movie, but it doesn't really do anything super impressive in my opinion. What did you think about this new Boogeyman Boogeyman movie, though? Leave me something about it in the comments below. Thank you all so much for watching this brand new review video on this page. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more horror content in the future. Please consider supporting me on Patreon if you want to support this channel further, and as always, don't forget to kill it out there, y'all.